welcome to this video. My name is Becca and this is little baby Clara. She's here. Oh, hi. It's been a very exciting time. It's actually a very rainy and gloomy day, but I am coming to you now to talk about my personal experiences having a baby in New York in the US versus here in New Zealand. Because I've had a lot of people wanting all of the differences and everything. But I feel like it's a little bit tricky because the experience that I had here in New Zealand, like somebody could have had the exact same experience in the US. Like every birth is different. You can have 2 births at the same hospital and they can go wildly different. So all I'm here trying to say is very badly that here are my experiences and yeah, I'm just going to compare them. First, I feel like I need to really quickly run through my first birth in New York so that you can have a background and like an idea of how that went. So I feel like I had a pretty atypical experience in the US. It was not a hospital birth. I birthed at the birth center and it was in like the Hudson Valley area of New York. So a very like liberal, open-minded, low intervention space. And I actually really loved my experience there. The other part of his birth is like, we were really poor at the time because my husband was still doing his school program and I was working, but we weren't making enough. So we actually qualified for the socialized healthcare at the time. So he was born completely for free, which is not the standard case in the US at all. Little baby Clara here, we had her at the birth center here in Auckland. And so it is kind of nice because I can compare the 2 different birth centers. But yeah, let's get started. So I think I'm going to start out with like the hugest differences that I noticed. So first, it's just the human connection, because in New York, I did it at a birth center. However, there's a whole giant gaggle of midwives. And so you're supposed to like cycle through to see them all because you never know who's going to be on call when you deliver. Yeah, every single time I was meeting with a different midwife, and the midwife that actually delivered me, I had never met before. And I never saw her again after. And so there's no continuity. There's no human connection. And here, I found a midwife. She did all my prenatal care. She did the delivery, and then she's doing like all my postpartum care. I want to be your best friend. I love her. Like she is soul bonded with me now. That to me, I think is probably like the biggest difference. Another huge thing that I noticed is the amount of trust that goes into the whole thing here. And again, I feel like that mainly depends on who you get lucky with as your provider. My midwife here was absolutely lovely, and I completely trusted her. And even better, she trusted me and she trusted my body in the whole process. Whereas it was a kind of a much different experience for me in New York. And then the final biggest thing, I think, is just there's so much less stress involved here in New Zealand with the whole process. Like, I think it's a lot more understood, like, this is a natural process. Like, of course, there are things that can go really wrong, but we're going to keep an eye on that. Anyways, yeah, just trust. Just trust in your body, trust in the process. And we're not going to like make this more stressful than it needs to be. So those are the biggest differences that I picked up on. Now I'm just going to run through the 3 different categories, like pregnancy, the delivery, and then the postpartum. Some of them are just fun little details and some of them are pretty big differences. Here in the beginning, I would say that I truly lucked out finding a midwife because I didn't realize that there's like a huge shortage problem with midwives. And I have friends that are like, basically upon conception, you need to start calling up midwives and trying to book yours. I didn't start looking until 10 weeks because I didn't know about this secret that nobody clued me in on. The other issue is that her due date was January 1st. And so nobody wanted to take me because everybody wants to try to take off for the holidays. They want to be with their families. Makes a lot of sense. I contacted so many midwives and they were all like, oh, I'm so sorry. You sound lovely, but I'm totally overbooked right now. So I somehow, after like 50 different women, ended up with my midwife, and I don't think I could have picked a more perfect one. Huge difference from the US to New Zealand is, of course, the fact that all maternity care is free here. A beautiful, wonderful thing. The only things that we had to pay for here were like the copay kind of things for our ultrasounds. Everybody makes a joke like if you give birth at the hospital, which I didn't, so I didn't even have to pay for this, but you have to pay for the parking at the hospital. And then the supplements are $5. Like I said before, my birth with William did end up being free, but that's not like standard. You do have the option of going private here. And it's funny because I have a lot of friends that did that. Like with your first, your kind of more scared, and so you want like the best care, and so you go private, you hire an OB. But I've had loads of friends that are like, yeah, I didn't like my experience that way, so the second time they do the like public midwife route and they like their experience a lot more. Another thing that I picked up on was the fact that the supplement recommendations are different here, because in the US you go to your appointments and they're like, oh yeah, go start taking like a prenatal multivitamin kind of thing. And here I asked about it and they're like, no, we just recommend that you take folic acid for the first trimester, iron if we test it and find out that you need it, and then iodine, and that's it. Anything else is on you if you want to do it. So that was crazy to me, because I actually did like a lot of research when I was pregnant with William, because I didn't like multivitamins, and I don't know, I'm weird. I don't like trust them, and I think it's unnecessary. And so I pretty much did the exact same thing. Another funny thing is at every appointment, especially like the last half of my pregnancy with William in New York, every single appointment I went in, you have to start the appointment with going to the bathroom and peeing in a cup, because they test for preeclampsia. Which again, this is just one of those things where it's like over monitoring and creating a lot more like stress, and it's unnecessary. But I think it's because they don't have the continuity of care. Because here, my midwife would just check my blood pressure, and if anything looked a little bit off, then she'd be like, oh, let's go do a pee test, or let's do a blood test. It just wasn't a necessary thing. So that's kind of nice. Another thing is that I didn't do a booty swab here. She didn't bring it up, and I didn't ask about it because I didn't want to do it. But in the US, it's like super standard to check for strep B, because it can cause a lot of issues for the babies. But yeah, she never brought it up and I didn't do it, and I think we're all okay. Next thing that I found so cool was here, my midwife, every time I went in for an appointment, she would like feel the baby's position. She would just use her hands and manually feel like, oh yeah, here's the head, here's the butt, like, oh, she's, lying in a good position or whatever. In New York, if they wanted to know the position, they would send me off for an ultrasound. I had so many more ultrasounds in New York than I did here. Like technically, I only needed one. I did the optional like viability scan in the beginning, but that was not necessary. I just did that for me and peace of mind. Here, they only want you to do the 20-week scan. I went a little bit over, and so she was like, if you go to 41 weeks, then we'd like to do another scan at that point, but I didn't get there. So yeah, like I think I had 3 or 4 more ultrasounds in New York than I did here. Another thing that I found so refreshing here, I feel like they're just a lot more open-minded to what you want. Like the idea, the discussion of having a home birth is not taboo here, and it's not like tacky. Whereas if you say that in the US, like everybody looks at you like you're a hippie and you're probably gonna wanna like eat your placenta raw after you have your baby. But here it's just like, oh, which one do you prefer? Home birth, birth center, or hospital? There's no pressure. My midwife was comfortable doing all 3, and not trying to say like everybody wants a home birth here in New Zealand. Like I know plenty of friends that like choose to go and have elective C-sections at the hospital, and that is perfectly fine. But it's just like the emphasis on what do you want, and whatever you want, we are open to it. So those are kind of like the little fun things that I noticed that were different throughout the whole pregnancy. So now we're moving on to the actual delivery. I did both of mine in birth centers, but I feel like the rooms were wildly different. So in New York, it still very much felt like a hospital room. Like it was a hospital bed, and that was it. Like I had a birthing ball, and then the little bathroom had a shower. They technically had one birthing tub for the entire birth center, but because it was COVID, nobody could use it anyways. So it wasn't very nice. And because it was COVID, we had to stay in our rooms. Like if Billy, my husband, left the room, he wasn't allowed to come back in. And I wasn't allowed to like leave to walk around or anything. So we had to stay confiscated in our room the entire time. Which for him, for his birth, from my first contraction to when I pushed him out was 36 hours. Like insanely long. When I got to the birth center to when I pushed him out was 14 hours. So we were stuck in that room for 14 hours. Not very fun. Whereas here, she came so fast. Like by the time I got into the room to pushing her out was 30 minutes. Which kind of sucks because I walked into that room and it felt like a spa. They had the birth tub in the room. They were already filling it up with this nice, warm, luscious water, and it created this like nice white noise throughout the room, and the humidity like made the room all warm and cozy, and they had everything you could ever like possibly think of. They had like a birthing couch. They had like a birthing ball, they had a peanut ball, they had so many balls, they had a diffuser that you could run essential oils in, they had mood lighting, a beautiful sound system that you could like hook your music up to if you wanted to, a bean bag that's special for pregnancy, like seriously anything you could hope for, they had it in that room. I was in and out so fast that I didn't get to use like any of it. However, it was really nice. A similarity between the two though is that the after rooms really sucked. I don't know what the thinking is that goes into this, but it's like, you know, you have your single bed that your partner can't fit into. It's a tiny room. You get terrible food, and I think they just want to get you out faster, honestly. Back to the delivery. The biggest difference, again, is just like I had my midwife and I trusted her completely. Oh, a huge difference also was that in New York, like when you're pushing your baby out, like 6 people will dash into the room and it's just this chaotic whirlwind of a bunch of different people doing all these different things and saying all these different things. Whereas in New Zealand, it was just my midwife, it was just my husband, and it was just me. Nobody else. So it was so quiet and peaceful and calm, and it was really nice. And yeah, there was just so much more trust involved. Because going back to New York, my experience there, I was laboring for such a long time, and they checked me, and I was 9 centimeters dilated, and I was in the shower going through these very intense contractions, and I was like, oh, I'm feeling very pushy, like I'm starting to push. And I told the nurse that, and the nurse was like, oh, no, like don't push, you're gonna hurt yourself, you're not complete yet, like try to hold off. And I'm like, I can't. Your body pushes for you, like you can't control these. But her saying all that just put all this like doubt and uncertainty in my mind and fear, which is so ridiculous because I was at the end. Like I don't know how anybody could see that and be like, oh yeah, like you're about to have your baby any second now. Anyways, I'm still bitter about that. Whereas here, I got into the room, she checked me and was like, oh yeah, you're like 5 to 6 centimeters dilated. After 2 contractions sitting on the little couch, I was like, I'm starting to feel a little bit pushy, but she just said I was like 5 centimeters dilated. There's no way that this could happen this fast. And I was like, can I get into the tub? Like get into the water? I don't want to get in too early because I know that can stall things out. And she's like, oh no, like if you feel ready to get in the water, you're fine to get into the water. And so I did. And yeah, like the next few contractions, I pushed her out. But again, I was like, is this okay? Like this is so fast. And she's like, no, trust your body, listen to it. It's part of the process. Like you're doing good. And that makes all the difference in the world when you're delivering. Like having somebody that trusts you and trusts your body. It's beautiful. Another difference was that in New York, there was so much more monitoring. Like you walk into the room and you have to sit on the bed because you're all strapped in because they want like a baseline of everything. You have to sit there forever. And then every time they come in, they got to like check everything. Whereas here, I got in, she listened to the heartbeat of the baby to make sure everything was looking good. She checked my dilation and then she totally left me alone. It wasn't until I was like actively pushing her out that she would check the heartbeat in between each contraction just to make sure like she wasn't going into distress or anything. So nice. So wonderful not to have to deal with all of that when you're going through such crazy intense contractions and everything. It was just so different not having this whole party going on in your room while you're pushing out a baby. It really struck me that like my midwife was the one that did everything. Like she did all of the me stuff. She helped me deliver. She stitched me up. Like she helped me deliver the placenta. She did all of the baby stuff. She took care of her. She weighed her. She measured her. She did all of the paperwork for everything. And then she, on top of all of that, cleaned up the entire room. Like she did all of the laundering. She did a lot of the wiping. I'm like, holy cow, that is completely different in New York because like the midwife comes in at the end. She helps you deliver the baby and then she's off like delivering another one and then you never see her again. And it's the nurses that like in this chaotic whirlwind, they're like pressing on your belly, somebody stitching you up, like another nurse is cleaning up the room, and it's just madness. Whereas here it's just this peaceful, calm, like, oh, when you're ready to get out of the tub, let's go lay down. Just lay here, let your placenta like naturally come out. We'll just like slowly getting around to stitching, which actually I did prefer in New York because it was so crazy. I was like, whoop, 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 oh, you're done. Whereas here I was like, and here's a stitch, and here's a stitch. It was so much more drawn out. But yeah, I was just so impressed by that. Like, you do so much work. The lack of stress involved in the whole process was so much more glaring here. Because with my first, I remember after you have your baby, you get settled into your next room. They came in with this paper, this form, this intense form, and they're like, here's a pin. You need to track what time you feed, how long they feed, which side, and then you need to track all of their wheeze and poos. That's intense. Do you realize how much newborns feed? Like, especially mine, they're munchers. Like, they like breastfeeding. And so I was like writing down so much information all the time. And then if I didn't, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do it. Anyways, here in New Zealand, when I was settled into the next room, I was like, oh, do I need to track anything? And they're like, no, don't do that. Like, research shows that all it does is increase anxiety in mothers, and it doesn't actually help the situation at all. So we don't recommend that you do that. And I was like, oh, what a relief. And it has been so much nicer. Like, yeah, I feed her on demand. Why do I need to track anything? Unless you're concerned, like she's not getting enough or anything, but whatever. So that was super nice. And then the next thing that I asked about, because in New York they told me like you need to set alarms if they sleep too long so that you can wake yourself and your baby up and feed them, especially like the first week or two. I asked that here and they're like, why would you do that? As long as your baby's fine and you're not concerned about it and they're eating fine, like you do not need to wake yourself up or your baby to feed. Like, it's fine. So that, again, it's just so much less anxiety. Another difference that I noticed was that all the tests were done in front of me. Not that I thought anything nefarious was happening when they took my baby away. I know a lot of people in the US will send like the husband to go and watch them do the test and everything. It was so nice because they would wheel the hearing test in and do it like while I'm holding her and nursing her, and they would just do the hearing test. And I got to see how it worked and like ask questions about it. And the same thing with all of the little shots and everything. Like, they did it in front of me. They didn't wheel her away to go do some strange witchcraft blood test. Another thing that was similar though is that with both experiences, I had a lactation consultant come in, which I think is pretty standard in most places, but it is so nice. Like, it's such an important service. I did think it was interesting though, because I learned more stuff this time. Like, I learned a ton during my first lactation consultant experience. They were so lovely. Like, I loved them and they taught me a lot, because breastfeeding is such a weird thing, especially in the beginning, because like it's a lot of you having to help them feed. I was just surprised that I was actually still learning stuff this time, because like one of the big things that she talked about was about the Hakas. Apparently they're causing a lot of mastitis cases, and so she totally recommended that you don't use it. I'm back. Not that you knew that I was gone, but so the last section is about the differences in postpartum. So I'm only a week and 2 days postpartum, so I don't have like the full spectrum of, you know, all the way to the traditional like 6 weeks. But honestly, I didn't even have that in New York because we left. I think the biggest obvious difference is the fact that the midwife comes to you for your postpartum care, at least in the beginning couple of weeks, which is so incredibly nice. Because looking back on it now with William, I think I had a touch of postpartum anxiety. I remember going to the pediatrician appointments right after he was born was so immensely overwhelming to me. Like, the idea of getting him all bundled up into the car seat, bringing the car seat into the pediatrician appointment, like having to nurse and like get him latched in a public place, and just dealing with all this information, like my brain just felt like it was scrambled still. Whereas this time around, I'm like, everything's great. Like, I still feel like I'm fully functional, maybe a little bit tired, but like not overwhelmed at all, which has been a huge difference. I so wish that I had had that in the States. Like, I wish that I had my person come to me, to my home, and come and check everything out and like reassure me that everything's okay. So that's been really nice. The next thing I think is just, again, that whole thing that ties back into like the human connectionness of it all, because it's just so much more personal and it's so much less clinical. Like, I remember in New York at the appointment, they leave the room and hand you this form, this questionnaire, and they're like, answer yes if you're feeling depressed. Like, this isn't going to catch anything. I'm the kind of person that would like have a broken foot and I would keep walking and talking to you because I don't like bothering anybody. And so it's like, even if I did feel a lot of these things, I'm going to put a lesser answer on a stupid form because that's just me. Whereas here, the midwife like knows me, and so she can tell if something's going on, and she can ask questions. And she does ask questions like, how are you? How are you feeling? Like, how's your body? How are you sleeping? And I feel like those are better indicators than, do you have clinical depression? Why are babies so perfect? Well, another thing that we had done, we had both of our kids' tongue tie clipped. Usually I'm very low intervention. However, with both of my kids, they're both sets of countries are like, you need to get that clipped, because it's like on the severe spectrum. My pediatrician in New York actually was like, you know, I've been doing this for like 30 years. I usually don't like interventions either. However, this is the worst tongue tie I've ever seen. Like, it will cause speech issues. So yeah, we just went and got it clipped. So in the US, we had to like go to an ENT, and they had these like guard scissors, and it's a really simple thing. They just go in and clip it. But here I went into the hospital and they just have these like medical scissors, and I'm like, oh, those look so much more scary. Like, you know what you're doing, right? Another random thing that I forgot about. I feel like it's very European and like Australian, Kiwi, whatever, to be offered gas and air, and like TENS machines are popular. Whereas in the US, it's not very popular at all. Like, I never got offered either of those things with my first, and it's just not as common. Like, I don't know where the divide comes from, but that is something that I noticed, because I had heaps of friends here that were like, oh, I used the TENS machine and it made all the difference for me. And yeah, my midwife offered me gas and air at one point, and I was like, no thanks, because I've always heard that it can kind of make you nauseous, and I just didn't even want to try it out. Billy, however, was like, oh, I'll try it for you, and I was like, no, stop it. But yeah, that's everything that I can think of. I loved both of my birth experiences. This one, I really loved just the trust and the connection, and the like, it's just a lot more peaceful, I feel. A lot less stress, a lot less monitoring, just trusting the process, trusting my body, trusting my midwife and my husband. So it's all been really good. But I think that's it, and I think somebody's waking up. So perfect timing. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment down below and I will answer them. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!